But I'm Will Ricks. I'm a senior environmental scientist at Duke Energy. I'm a threatened and endangered species biologist. And today I'm going to go through some big picture items and just kind of work through, Duke Energy's natural resources program and kind of how we, ended up, becoming involved in the Monarch CCAA. So next slide, please. So, this is just a general overview. I'll kind of go through what we do at Duke Energy, and I promise that I'll kind of show how that gets us to the Monarch CCAA. And really, what I want to go through, kind of from a big picture, is how pollinators and pollinator plantings have gone from stewardship to environmental compliance, and just along the way, some of the challenges and justifications and next steps. And I'll also mention, and just kind of for the sake of time too, but our application is currently under review, and I probably won't go through a lot of the specifics on that. We can kind of talk about that at the end, and just kind of for the sake of this talk, I'm just going to kind of keep things big picture. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that I pulled off of a presentation that almost everyone in our natural resources group has given. So Duke has a compliance plus standard. So the compliance is all the threatened and endangered species, and I could go into tons of detail, FERC hydro relicensing projects, to all the work that we do on renewables and so on and so forth, for our federal regulatory side. And then we kind of always had this plus aspect that was stewardship, and that could be anything from supporting a county park with bat boxes or bluebird boxes, or creating recreational areas, or education and outreach, and then of course conservation items like planting pollinators. So next slide, please. So just a little background on Duke Energy, and really what I want to get into here is, of course, we're a large group, a large utility, and I can kind of show that in the next slide. So you can click the next slide, or I'm sorry, the one after that. But we're good here. You can go back, Iris. I'll go through that first. So this is a number of items that we've kind of worked through our natural resources group. Of course, we do wildlife and fisheries work, but I'll just kind of focus on the wildlife work for today. But as you can see, just a number of items there, from our threatened and endangered species program, bald and golden eagle protection program, our avian protection program, and then of course we work within renewables, and of course do wetlands work. And for those examples, one thing I wanted to touch on that I'll kind of get into the challenges later, but when it comes to our bat work, we have specific defined red zones, and where they overlap with our right-of-ways for red cockaded woodpeckers. We know where those clusters are, and we have specific best management practices for construction and for vegetation management. And we also have our bald eagle nests mapped out as well. So just as those few examples, we have I guess kind of easily tracked areas that we have best management practices associated with. Of course, we go out and do surveys, and we support our customers based on that known information that we have. And you know, with the, you know, monarchs and pollinator plantings, it's a little bit different because we didn't have those, you know, red zone, so to speak, or defined areas to kind of track that for compliance. So that's kind of a big item I want to talk about today is, you know, the Monarch CCAA and the pollinator world that we had worked in for the last 5 years has gone from stewardship to compliance item. So next slide. So as you can see, for a regulated service territory, we are in Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky. For our Midwest section, North and South Carolina, which what we just call the Carolinas, and then Florida as well. And then for Piedmont Natural Gas, we are, you know, also, you know, add that Tennessee area, and we kind of include that into our Carolinas territory. So next slide. And then within renewables, this is probably not the most updated because this gets updated all the time. But just as an example, that this is kind of, you know, some of the locations that we're in throughout the country. Next slide. So, you know, we like you all, you know, work with all of our federal partners, as you see listed there, our state agencies, and then a lot of, you know, NGOs, private companies, consultants, et cetera. And, you know, we meet at each U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service office on a, you know, somewhat regular basis. You know, we're in constant contact with federal lands. We work on, you know, memorandums of understandings on right-of-ways for certain, you know, preserves, certain, you know, military properties, and then, you know, also other permits with federal lands, just to make sure that we're within compliance and that we're on the same page with our partners. So we've always had a background at Duke Energy of, you know, working with our partners, you know, having defined, you know, expectations as far as, you know, federal and state listed species, in some case pet species and things like that for the particular locations. But, you know, fortunately, as far as, you know, the Monarch CCAA is concerned, and kind of, you know, approaching our leadership and our customer groups, we have, you know, a long-standing relationship for, you know, just, you know, environmental compliance within our right-of-ways with our agency partners. So it was kind of, you know, an easy, you know, evolution into the CCAA. So next slide. So just a quick background, we're looking at, you know, which right-of-ways we would use. Of course, we have transmission and distribution, and then natural gas. So within, you know, transmission and distribution, we have our integrated vegetation management program, which is very strong at Duke, and supports a lot of those programs that I just listed. You know, we promote pollinators and pollinator plantings. A lot of the you know, long-term work that we've done, just as an example, to remove woody stems. In many of those cases, we're not seeing many of the, you know, sweet gums and loblollies and maples and things that we have down here that we have to remove for you know, NERC compliance. And we're seeing, you know, more, you know, just, I'll say in general, you know, wildlife friendly, forb and grass-based, you know, habitats on our right-of-ways. And then we also have pollinator plantings. I know when I first started, we had a $500,000 project with NWTF for plantings plantings of pollinators on right-of-ways. I mentioned those conservation agreements that we have with transmission and distribution for some of those, state, federal, military lands, easement lands, and it's just a positive relationship there. And then so on the other side for Piedmont Natural Gas, those right-of-ways were maintained multiple times a year. So they were not ideal for pollinator habitat, so we did not include those as a part of our application. So next slide. So what we have that was very beneficial as well, that my manager Scott Fletcher and myself started. Basically, when I started in 2017, was an EHS viewer, which I should explain better, but our group is the Environmental Health and Safety Group. So it's basically a natural resources mapper for all those areas that I showed earlier, Midwest Carolinas and Florida, for our regulated area, and it shows the Duke right-of-ways, down to very specific details on that. Sites and our facilities. We use North Carolina Natural Heritage Program and NatureServe data to show, where we have special concerns with threatened and endangered species, and other protected species. It could be a pet species for a federal land or whatever the case may be. And then we also have federal and state and conservation lands there. So, just as an example, if vegetation management goes out, in a particular area, they can see where the wetlands are, where there's, an eagle's nest. They don't actually see it because we can't share that information, but they see, like Scott and myself, we see all the specifics, and our customers see the BMPs associated with that. So next slide. So I couldn't show, without a lot of permissions from a lot of different people, I couldn't show, any road names or line numbers or specifics here. So I'm sorry, this seems a little vague, but if you look on the right, the left picture, you'll see protected species. So these are our red zones. So if vegetation management sees this, they'll most likely contact myself to see how to work through that. The middle is protected lands. So this is a federal property that we have, specific special permits for. And then we've outlined our CCAA acres on the right slide as, that kind of purple mark on the right-of-ways, and that kind of helps support the CCAA application monitoring, etc. So next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, as far as working with leadership and our different customer groups, our priority is environmental compliance, and then that plus piece has generally been stewardship. So, we have a strong commitment to stewardship, but, generally that comes, once we've completed the compliance piece. So, but, with pollinators, with kind of a lot of the talk from earlier today, and what's the rusty patch bumblebees listed, and monarchs, and, other pollinator species, proposed for listing, we've kind of come into a time that it's gone from stewardship to environmental compliance. So next slide. So the challenges with the CCAA, and we were all in joining the CCAA from the beginning, but just being a larger utility, we weren't exactly sure, how to make all that work and kind of fit within, the guidelines of the application. So, we're going to have to, calculate habitat and acreage over a large area. We would need support from multiple customer groups and leadership. And we would need to figure out a way to do this all efficiently rather, and just be prepared for and most utilities are changing in a number of ways, so we would need to be prepared for that, and also ensuring that the monitoring could be completed. So next slide. So our justification, with that was, this is not just a stewardship item anymore. This is now environmental compliance. So it goes into that, priority piece. We already have, a strong IBM program. There's clearly long-term cost savings. I think, you all know what those are. And not to mention just the things the items I mentioned earlier, as far as enhancing our partnerships with a number of different groups. And then now also, as the last, well, we've always had it, but it's really strengthened in the last couple of years, is our sustainability group, which of course pollinators would fall into. So next slide. So the next steps, of course, is monitoring, following up with new pollinator sites, and just making sure that our, all of our customers are aware of this program, as they are, but, new people coming into new positions, etc. Adding those pollinator sites to the viewer, which also gets, added to our application ultimately as well. Tracking new listed species, and continuing to work with customers in both generation and renewables. So next slide. So that's all I have. I know we're 1 minute to go, but I'm fine, hanging around as long as needed. So feel free to ask any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Will. And yeah, sorry to put you right up against the end time. So we still have some folks on the call. So anyone with questions for Will about Duke's enrollment or participation? I see a comment from Rick Johnstone in the chat about natural gas rights of way being divided into a pipe zone, border zone, where a 15-foot swath can be managed to grass-friendly habitat. This eliminates the need to mow the entire right-of-way multiple times a year. Yeah, good point. Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, Iris, I also want to mention, I think the whole concept, and not just Duke, but most utilities, in looking at this at the end, Will was talking about pollinator sites. And that leads to you're planting a site, or you're just monitoring certain sites. And I think if we're really going to be successful, not only for the monarch, but for other pollinators, endangered species of bees that are going to be coming down the pike, utilities need to start looking at their rights of ways completely as potential pollinator habitat by managing them in that type of a fashion. And we really need to look at rights of ways as an asset for providing pollinator habitat, rather than vegetation being maintained as a liability for the utilities. And it's a different mindset, but I think we really need to go there, so that we're not looking at pollinator sites, we're looking at 7,000 miles of right of way as being pollinator habitat.
Yeah, and I think, again, certainly in some of the conversations I've had, I'm seeing that shift happening. Interested in others' thoughts on that, but again, taking the more landscape level approach is, I think, the direction lots of folks are starting to look. So good.
I think that's a good point as well. I think that's kind of naturally occurring through our IVM program. Just I guess where it's not necessarily fully 100% habitat creation minded per se, but that's that's been an important piece to that, and the vegetation management specialists recognize that wildlife piece, and now compliance piece with that as well, that we're able to work better with our partners and show them the benefits of that program, and kind of introduce new tools instead of the kind of old school mowing the right of ways. Now we have a lot more tools in the toolbox that our partners support to manage the right of ways on a site by site basis.
Will, this is Dan Williams with Davey. I had to unfortunately take a call through a portion of your presentation, so I might have missed it. But do you see any interest, or are you making connections with your ESG reporting in terms of the value that these rights of way as an asset might be contributing? Is there any dialogue that you can speak to?
As far as, are you talking about with leadership or with our customer groups, or?
I would say, I guess starting with leadership. I mean, is there any internal push to capture what's going on and feed that into your reporting metrics? Just if you can talk about that on this call.
Yes, yeah, I would certainly say so. We are fortunate, in our EH&S group to have leadership that very strongly supports our mission, both for compliance and stewardship, and now these are linked as well. So, I guess I would say that, we have a strong push and a strong, all the way up to the top, strong support from our leaders. We're very fortunate with that, in our group, or in our company as a whole, to have that support, and to really acknowledge that we can, work with multiple customer bases, and in a lot of ways, lower cost, work more efficiently, while creating these habitats, because in our case, oftentimes, these are, we're just promoting native plants, right? It's not all planting pollinators. We're removing unwanted plants, promoting native plants, and with that, forb and grass landscape and habitat, it's just kind of a win-win for all groups, because we're not impacting the lines with those plants, and we're not having to manage them quite as often, and go in there, bring equipment in there, potentially, work through wetlands and all the other things that are challenging with working on right of ways. So and you could certainly, shoot me an email or give me a call too, if you want to go into more detail on that.
Thanks much. Appreciate it.